The black Mercedes-Benz S-Class sat motionless in Lagos traffic on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. Inside the luxury vehicle, Richard Adeleke scrolled through his phone, reviewing construction contracts worth billions of naira. The air conditioning hummed softly, insulating him from the chaos of Surulere's crowded streets outside. His driver, Moses, drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, waiting for the gridlock to clear. Richard barely noticed the street vendors weaving between cars, hawking everything from phone chargers to bottled water. This was Lagos. This was normal. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the hotel development in Lekki that would cement his reputation as one of Nigeria's most innovative real estate moguls. His assistant had just sent 3 urgent emails about the land acquisition. The governor's office was waiting for his response. Everything in his world moved at the speed of money and power and success. Then Moses's voice cut through his concentration. He said, "Oga, look at that small girl." Richard glanced up, irritated at the interruption. Through the tinted window, he saw what had caught Moses's attention. A small child, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, moved between the stationary vehicles. Her tiny hand extended toward car windows, her voice barely audible above the honking horns and engine noise. She said, "Please, Ma. Please, sir. Anything. Just small something." Richard's finger hovered over his phone screen. Something about the child made him pause. She wore a faded yellow dress that had once been beautiful, now torn at the hem and stained with dirt. Her feet were bare, cracked and dusty from walking on hot asphalt. But it wasn't her poverty that stopped his breath. It was her face, the delicate features, the way she held her head slightly tilted, the small birthmark on her left temple that he'd kissed 1,000 times when she was a baby. The world tilted sideways. Richard's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the leather seat. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. He whispered, "No. No, that's not possible." Moses turned around, concern spreading across his face. He said, "Oga, wetin happen? You don't see ghost?" Richard couldn't answer. He was staring at the child's profile as she approached the car ahead of them. High cheekbones. Those eyes, even from a distance, he recognized them. They were his eyes, his mother's eyes, his daughter's eyes. The child his ex-wife had taken from him 3 years ago after their bitter divorce. The daughter he'd been fighting to see in court for what felt like forever. The little girl who'd been only 6 years old the last time he held her. The last time he'd heard her call him Daddy. The last time his world had made sense. Chidera, his baby girl was begging in Lagos traffic like a common street child, like she had no father, no home, no one who loved her. If you're loving this story already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. And don't forget to comment below what country you're watching from and your local time right now. Richard's hand moved to the door handle before his brain fully processed what he was doing. The traffic remained frozen, cars packed so tightly that opening the door was nearly impossible. But he tried anyway, his fingers fumbling with the latch. Moses said, "Oga, wait now. The traffic go clear soon." But Richard wasn't listening. He managed to crack the door open just as the child turned toward their vehicle. For one suspended moment, their eyes met through the window. Chidera's expression didn't change. No recognition flickered in her gaze, no sudden joy at seeing her father, no tears of relief, no arms reaching out. She simply extended her small hand, her lips forming the same practiced plea she'd given to dozens of other cars that afternoon. Her face was blank, emotionless, the look of a child who had learned to survive by feeling nothing. She said, "Please, sir, help me. I hungry." The words punched through Richard's chest like bullets, his 9-year-old daughter begging, His child, who should have been in school, wearing a uniform, carrying books, complaining about homework, asking for lunch money, playing with friends. Instead, she stood barefoot in Lagos traffic, asking strangers for money to eat. He said, "Chidera, baby, it's daddy." But his voice came out as a choked whisper, swallowed by the noise of the street. A horn blared. The traffic lurched forward suddenly. Cars began moving, slowly at first, then picking up speed. Richard watched in horror as Chidera stumbled backward, nearly falling under the wheels of a Danfo bus. His shout tore from his throat. He said, "Chidera, move!" The girl darted to the side of the road with the practiced agility of someone who'd been dodging traffic for months. Someone who'd learned that survival meant quick reflexes, meant staying alert, meant never trusting that cars would stop for you. Richard tried to climb out, but Moses grabbed his arm hard. He said, "Oga, you go die, oh. The car dey move." Indeed, the Mercedes was rolling forward now, caught in the flow of traffic that had finally begun to break free. Richard twisted in his seat, craning his neck to keep the yellow dress in sight. But she was already disappearing into the crowd, swallowed by the chaos of pedestrians, hawkers, and beggars that lined the roadside. Moses said, "Oga, which girl be that? Why you dey shout her name like that?" Richard couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. He reached for his phone with shaking hands and pulled up the last photo he had of Chidera. It was 3 years old. She'd been 6, wearing a pink birthday dress, her hair in neat cornrows with colourful beads at the ends. Her smile showed missing front teeth. Her eyes sparkled with the innocent joy of a child who'd never known hunger or fear or abandonment. That child and the skeletal beggar he'd just seen on the street didn't look like the same person. But they were. Every instinct in Richard's body screamed the truth. That was his daughter. That was his baby girl begging for food while he sat in an air-conditioned Mercedes worth more than most Nigerians earned in 5 years. He said, "Moses, turn around. Now." Moses's eyes widened in the rearview mirror. He said, "Oga, we dey inside one way. I no fit turn." Richard's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. He said, "I don't care if you have to reverse through this entire street. Turn this car around. Now." Moses had worked for Richard Adeleke for 7 years. He'd seen his employer angry before, seen him close business deals with ice in his veins, seen him fire people without hesitation. But he'd never heard this tone. This wasn't anger. This was something primal, something desperate, something that spoke of a man whose entire world had just shattered and reformed in the space of 30 seconds. Moses began looking for any possible space to maneuver. The traffic had picked up speed now, making a U-turn impossible. Richard's hands clenched into fists on his lap. Every second took him farther from Chidera. Every meter of distance felt like a chasm opening in his chest. Where was she going? Who was she with? Was she safe? Was she alone? How long had she been living like this? The questions multiplied, each one more terrifying than the last. His ex-wife, Patricia, had disappeared with Chidera 3 years ago. One day they'd been living in the Ikoyi mansion. The next day, Patricia had packed bags and vanished while Richard was on a business trip to Abuja. He'd returned to an empty house and a note that said simply, "She said, 'You'll never see us again. You don't deserve to be a father.'" The divorce had been vicious. Patricia had accused him of being married to his work, of choosing money over family, of being emotionally absent. Some of it was true. Richard had built his real estate empire from nothing, working 16-hour days, traveling constantly, always chasing the next deal. But he'd loved his daughter. God, how he'd loved Chidera. Every business trip, every late night, every missed dinner had been for her future. To give her everything he'd never had growing up in a poor family in Ajagunle. where his own father had worked himself to death trying to feed 6 children. He'd wanted better for Chidera. He'd wanted her to never know poverty, never know hunger, never know the shame of worn clothes and empty pockets. Moses finally found a side street. He swung the Mercedes into it, earning angry honks from other drivers, then began the complicated process of turning around in the narrow space. Richard was already on his phone. He said, "James, I found her. I found Chidera." His head of security answered immediately. He said, "What? Where?" Richard's voice shook. He said, "Surulere, in traffic." She was begging. "Moses, where exactly were we?" Moses said, "Adeniran Ogunsanya Street, Oga. Near the junction way, Dago Bode Thomas." Richard relayed the information. James's response was immediate. He said, "I'm sending 3 teams now. We'll lock down the area." "Don't worry, sir. We'll find her." But Richard wasn't reassured. Lagos swallowed people. The city had 20 million souls, and a small girl in a yellow dress could vanish into that sea of humanity in seconds. They'd been so close. He'd been within touching distance of his daughter for the first time in 3 years, and he'd let her slip away. The thought made him want to scream, to tear apart the car with his bare hands, to do something, anything that felt like action instead of this helpless sitting. Are you still with me? This story gets even more intense. Drop a heart in the comments if you're feeling this. The Mercedes completed its turn and headed back toward the junction where Richard had seen Chidera. But traffic had shifted. The gridlock that had trapped them before had cleared. Cars now moved freely through the intersection. Richard stared out the window, scanning every face on the crowded sidewalk. Women carrying trays of plantain chips on their heads. Men pushing wooden carts loaded with bags of sachet water. Children everywhere, dozens of them, selling tissues, asking for alms, washing windshields for spare change. But none of them wore a yellow dress. None of them had Chidera's face. None of them had that distinctive birthmark on the left temple. Moses drove slowly, ignoring the angry honks from cars behind them. He said, "Oga, wet in the girl they wear again?" Richard's voice was hollow. He said, "Yellow dress, torn at the bottom. No shoes." "She had no shoes, Moses." "My daughter, and she had no shoes." Moses's face crumpled with sympathy, but he said nothing. What could he say? What words existed that could make this better, that could change what they'd both seen, that could erase the image of that small child begging for food? They circled the block 3 times. Richard got out of the car at the intersection, standing on the median despite the danger, turning in circles, searching desperately for any glimpse of yellow fabric, any sign of his daughter. Street hawkers stared at the well-dressed man in the expensive suit, standing in the middle of traffic like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. A woman selling oranges from a wooden tray approached him. She said, "Oga, you dey find somebody." Richard showed her the old photo of Chidera on his phone, though he knew it was probably useless after 3 years. He said, "Have you seen this girl?" "Today. Just now. She was here." The woman squinted at the screen, then shook her head. She said, "Plenty small pekin dey here every day, Oga." "I know fit remember all of them, but if you say she dey beg, maybe she dey sleep for under the bridge. Plenty of them dey sleep there." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Under the bridge, where the homeless slept, where drug addicts and criminals gathered, where his 9-year-old daughter might be spending. Her nights might be right now, might have been for weeks or months. He pulled out his wallet and handed the woman 5,000 naira. He said, "If you see her, if she comes back here, please, keep her safe. Call this number." He wrote his personal mobile number on one of his business cards. The woman's eyes widened at the money and the card. She nodded quickly. She said, "I go watch AM, Oga. If I see Am, I go call you sharp. Richard handed his card to 5 more vendors, repeating the same message, handing out money like he was trying to buy back his daughter, 1 naira note at a time. By the time he returned to the Mercedes, James had called 3 times. His security teams had fanned out across the Surulere area, checking under bridges, in abandoned buildings, anywhere street children might gather. So far, nothing. Richard slumped in the back seat. Moses started the engine but didn't move. He said, "Oga, where we dey go now?" Richard stared at his hands. They were shaking. He said, "I don't know. I don't know where my own daughter is." The admission broke something inside him. For 3 years, he'd operated on the assumption that Chidera was somewhere safe, hidden by Patricia out of spite, but still cared for, still fed, still clothed, still sheltered, still loved even if not by him. But the child he'd seen in traffic wasn't safe, wasn't fed, wasn't cared for. That child was surviving, not living. Richard's phone rang. It was his lawyer, Barrister Okonkwo. He said, "Mr. Adeleke, I heard from James. Is it true? Did you really see Chidera?" Richard's voice was flat. He said, "It was her. I'm sure. She was begging Okonkwo, in traffic. My daughter was begging for food." The lawyer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This changes everything. If she's been abandoned, if Patricia has neglected her to this extent, we can file for emergency custody immediately. The court will act fast." Richard felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. He said, "How fast? How long?" The lawyer hesitated. He said, "A few days at minimum, maybe a week. We'll need to find her first, document the conditions, file the proper motions." Richard cut him off. He said, "A week? She could be dead in a week. She could disappear. Someone could hurt her. A week is too long." Okonkwo's voice was gentle but firm. He said, "I understand, Mr. Adeleke, but we have to follow the legal process. If we try to take her without proper custody orders, Patricia could accuse you of kidnapping. You could end up in jail, and then you'd be no help to Chidera at all." Richard wanted to scream, wanted to throw his phone through the car window, wanted to do something, anything that felt like action instead of this helpless waiting. But he knew Okonkwo was right. He'd spent 3 years learning the hard way that Nigerian family law moved at its own pace. That passion and money couldn't speed up a system that operated on its own timeline. He said, "Start the paperwork, file everything, emergency, custody, neglect charges, whatever will move fastest. And Okonkwo, I'm offering a reward. 5 million naira to anyone who helps find her and brings her home safely." The lawyer's sharp intake of breath was audible. He said, "Mr. Adeleke, that's a lot of money. You'll have every con artist in Lagos claiming they've seen her." Richard's laugh was bitter. He said, "Let them come. I'll interview 1,000 liars if it means one of them actually leads me to my daughter." Richard drove to the police station and filed a missing child report. The deputy police officer, DPO Okafor, was a stern but honest man who took the report seriously. He said, "I have children too, sir. I understand. I'll send officers to check the areas where street children gather in Surulere. I'll put out a bulletin with your daughter's description. If she's found, we'll take her into protective custody immediately and contact you." As evening approached, Richard received a call from one of James's team members. A woman who runs a food stall near Adeniran Ogunsanya said she sees street children every day. One of them matched the description. She thought the girl sleeps under the Costain overhead bridge. Richard's heart leaped. By the time he reached the bridge area, his security team had already positioned themselves. Mama Nkechi, the food stall owner, was waiting. She was a kind-faced older woman who fed street children when she could. She said, "Small girl, like this tall, yellow dress way tear for down, no shoe. She get mark for here." She touched her left temple. Every day she'd beg for road. Evening time she'd come here. Sometimes I give him food. She hungry well. Richard's voice shook. He said, "How long have you been seeing her?" The woman thought for a moment. She said, "Maybe 2, 3 weeks now." Richard's mind reeled. Weeks. His daughter had been living like this for weeks at minimum. He said, "I'll wait. I'll wait all night if I have to." Mama Nkechi gave him food and a place to sit. As darkness fell, the character of the street changed. From the shadows under the bridge, different people emerged. Small groups gathered. Some were clearly families, some were lone men, and some were children, moving in packs. I'm getting emotional over here. Smash that like button and comment your vibe right now. Happy, curious, or emotional, drop the emoji that fits you best, because this story is about to take a crazy turn. At 7:15, Mama Nkechi began packing up her stall. She ladled the last of her rice and stew into containers and called out. She said, "Food day hero. Who day hungry, come chop." From the shadows, figures began to emerge. 5 children appeared, 6, 7. Richard scanned their faces desperately. Then he saw her. She came last, hanging back until the other children had gotten their food. She was even smaller than Richard remembered. Thinner. The yellow dress hung on her frame like a tent. Her hair was now a tangled mass that hadn't been combed in weeks. But it was Chidera. Richard's legs moved before his brain caught up. He took 3 steps forward and stopped, suddenly terrified that he'd scare her away. James grabbed his arm. He said, "Sir, wait. Let her get comfortable. Don't spook her." It was the hardest thing Richard had ever done. To stand still, to watch his daughter reach for food with trembling hands, to see her gulp down rice so fast she nearly choked. Richard took a deep breath and walked slowly toward his daughter. She was sitting on the curb now, the food container in her lap. He stopped about 10 feet away. He said, "Chidera." The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. For a second, just a second, Richard saw recognition there. But then it was gone, replaced by the blank wariness of a street child. She stood quickly, ready to run. He said, "Baby, it's me. It's Daddy. Please don't run." Chidera's voice, when it came, was hoarse. She said, "I don't know you." Richard took one careful step closer. He said, "Yes, you do. You know me. I'm your father. I've been looking for you for so long." Tears were streaming down his face now. He said, "Remember? Remember when you were little? I used to check under your bed for monsters. You called me Daddy Dada. You loved butterflies. Your favorite color was purple, remember?" Something flickered in Chidera's eyes, confusion, fear, and something else. "Maybe memory," she said. "My daddy, he's not here. He's gone. Mama said he's never coming back." The words hit Richard like knives. He said, "Your mama was wrong, baby. I'm here. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped loving you." But Chidera was shaking her head, backing away. She said, "No, you're lying." Mama said rich people lie. She said nobody wants us." Richard took another step. He said, "I want you. I've always wanted you. You're my daughter. You're everything to me. Please, Chidera, please let me help you. Please come home." The girl's face crumpled. She was crying now. She said, "I don't have a home. I just have here. Mama's gone. Mama left me and she's not coming back. She said to wait, but she never came back." Richard couldn't maintain his distance anymore. He closed the space between them and dropped to his knees in front of his daughter. He said, "I'm here now, and I'm never leaving you again. I promise you, baby. You'll never sleep under a bridge again. You'll never be hungry again. You'll never be alone again." Chidera stared at him, her small body shaking with sobs. She said, "You promise?" Richard pulled her into his arms, and for a miracle, she didn't pull away. He held his daughter for the first time in 3 years. He said, "I promise. On everything I have, on my life, I promise." Chidera's thin arms wrapped around his neck. She buried her face in his shoulder and cried. Deep, wrenching sobs. Richard held her and cried with her, rocking back and forth on a dirty Lagos curb. His daughter in his arms. Alive. Safe. Found. Everything else could wait. James approached carefully. He said, "Sir, we should move. It's not safe here after dark." Richard nodded. He stood, lifting Chidera in his arms. She was 9 years old, but weighed barely more than a 6-year-old should. She clung to him, her face still pressed against his shoulder. Mama Nkechi smiled, tears on her face. She said, thank God you find Am. Go well, Papa. Take care of your Pekin." As the Mercedes pulled away from the bridge, Richard held Chidera in the back seat. She hadn't let go of him. But as they drove through Lagos traffic, heading back toward Ikoyi, reality began to set in. This wasn't the end of the story. Patricia was still out there. The court still had to rule. And Chidera, she'd been through trauma Richard couldn't fully understand yet. But as he looked down at his daughter's face, finally relaxed in sleep against his chest, Richard knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd found her. And this time, he wouldn't fail her. This time, he'd be the father she needed. Whatever it took. Whatever it cost. She was home. They arrived at Richard's mansion in Ikoyi by 8:30 at night. The massive gate swung open automatically, and the Mercedes glided up the curved driveway. Chidera stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in the grandeur through the tinted windows. Richard felt her small body tense. She said, "Where are we?" Richard kept his tone gentle. He said, "This is my house. Our house now. You're safe here, baby. I promise." But Chidera was pulling away, pressing herself against the opposite door. She said, "It's too big. I can't. I don't belong here." The words broke Richard's heart all over again. He said, "You belong wherever I am. And I'm here. This is your home." The massive front door opened. Richard's housekeeper, Mrs. Adebayo, stood there. She'd worked for him for 5 years, watched Chidera grow until the day Patricia left. Her hand flew to her mouth when she saw who Richard was carrying. She said, "Chichi? Is that you?" That had been Mrs. Adebayo's nickname for Chidera. The little girl lifted her head slightly. Some distant memory flickering, she said, "Auntie Bayo?" Mrs. Adebayo was crying now, nodding. She said, "Yes, my dear. Welcome home, Chichi. Welcome home. Wait until you see what happens next. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You don't want to miss how this ends." Richard carried Chidera inside. The marble floors gleamed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Chidera looked around with wide eyes. She said, I remember this place. I used to live here." Richard's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded. Mrs. Adebayo led them upstairs. Chidera's old bedroom had remained untouched, pink walls with butterfly decals, a bookshelf full of children's stories, a toy chest overflowing with dolls and stuffed animals. Richard set Chidera down gently on the bed. She sat stiff and uncomfortable. Mrs. Adebayo said, "Chichi, you must be hungry. Let me bring you food." But Chidera shook her head. She said, "I already ate. At the bridge. Mama Nkechi gave me rice." Richard's heart clenched. He said, "That's good. But maybe later you'd like something else. Ice cream? You used to love strawberry ice cream." Chidera's eyes widened. She said, "Ice cream?" The wonder in her voice destroyed Richard. He said, "I'll have Mrs. Adebayo bring some up. But first, would you like a bath? Clean clothes?" Chidera looked down at herself, at the torn yellow dress crusted with dirt. She nodded slowly. Mrs. Adebayo said, "Come, Chi-Chi, I'll help you." When Mrs. Adebayo led Chidera to the bathroom, Richard called his family doctor. Dr. Ogunleye answered on the second ring. Richard said, "I need you to come to my house tonight. My daughter, she's been on the streets. I need her examined. I need documentation of her condition for court." Dr. Ogunleye didn't ask questions. He said, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. The bathroom door opened. Mrs. Adebayo emerged first, her face soft with emotion. She said, "Sir, come see." Chidera stood wrapped in a large towel, her skin pink from scrubbing. Mrs. Adebayo had managed to wash her hair, and now it was clean, freed from weeks of dirt. Without the grime, Chidera looked more like the 6-year-old Richard remembered. Younger, more vulnerable. Chidera's voice was small. She said, "Is it okay that I used all the soap? I was very dirty." Richard's eyes burned. He said, "Baby, you can use all the soap in the house. It's yours. All of this is yours. You never have to ask permission here." Mrs. Adebayo helped Chidera into a soft pink nightgown printed with stars. It was too big now, hanging loose on Chidera's thin frame. But it was clean and comfortable. Chidera touched the fabric wonderingly. She said, "It's so soft. I forgot things could be soft." They went downstairs to the kitchen. Mrs. Adebayo opened the freezer and pulled out strawberry ice cream. She scooped a generous portion into a bowl and added chocolate sauce and a cherry on top. When she set it in front of Chidera, the child just stared. Richard said, "Go ahead, baby, it's for you." Slowly, hesitantly, Chidera picked up the spoon. She took a tiny bite. Her eyes closed. A sound somewhere between a sigh and a sob escaped her lips. She said, "I remember this. Mama used to give me ice cream sometimes. Before everything got bad." Richard pulled out a chair next to her and sat down. He said, "Can you tell me what happened, sweetheart? Where's your mama now?" Chidera took another bite of ice cream before answering. She said, "Mama, she got sick. We were living in a small room in Ajegunle. She stopped going out, stopped working. She just stayed in bed all the time." Richard leaned forward. He said, "What kind of sick?" Chidera shrugged. She said, "I don't know. She was always crying. She wouldn't eat. She talked to herself sometimes. She kept saying she made mistakes, that she ruined everything, that you were going to find us and take me away." Richard's chest tightened. It sounded like depression, possibly severe. He said, "Then what happened?" Chidera's voice got quieter. She said, "One day she said we had to leave the room, that we didn't have money for it anymore. We went to her friend's house, but they said we couldn't stay. We went to another place, same thing. Then we just started moving, sleeping different places, eating when we could." She paused, stirring her ice cream. She said, "Then one morning Mama told me to wait at the bus stop. She said she was going to find help. She said she'd come back before dark." She took a shaky breath. She said, "But she didn't come back. I waited all night. I waited the next day. I waited and waited. But she never came." Richard could barely breathe. He said, "How long ago was that?" Chidera thought for a moment. She said, "I don't know. A long time. Many days. Maybe when the rain started." It had been raining heavily in Lagos for the past month. That meant Patricia had abandoned Chidera at least 4 weeks ago, maybe longer. Richard's voice was gentle. He said, "What did you do? Where did you sleep?" Chidera went back to her ice cream. She said, "I met other kids, under the bridge. They showed me how to beg, how to find food, how to stay safe at night. The older ones, they protected me sometimes. But sometimes they took my food too. That's just how it is." Richard reached out slowly and took her small hand in his. He said, "You were very brave, sweetheart. You survived. That takes strength. Chidera looked up at him, her eyes ancient in her young face. She said, "Are you really my daddy? Or am I dreaming? Sometimes I dream things and then I wake up and they're not real." Richard's grip tightened on her hand. He said, "I'm real. I'm really your daddy. And you're really home. And tomorrow we're going to court to make sure you never have to leave again." The doorbell rang. Dr. Ogunle arrived with his medical bag. The examination took 30 minutes. Dr. Ogunle was thorough but gentle. When he was done, he asked to speak with Richard privately. In the hallway, Dr. Ogunle's face was grave. He said, "Mr. Adeleke, your daughter is severely malnourished. She's 30 pounds underweight for her age. She has several infected cuts that need antibiotics. She shows signs of prolonged stress and possible trauma." Richard felt like someone was standing on his chest. He said, "Will she be okay? Can we fix it?" Dr. Ogunle nodded. He said, "Physically, yes. With proper nutrition, medical care and rest, she'll recover. But the psychological effects, those will take longer. I strongly recommend she see a child psychologist as soon as possible." The doctor wrote several prescriptions and a detailed report documenting Chidera's condition. He said, "This report should be sufficient for court. It clearly shows neglect and abandonment." Richard went back to Chidera's room. She'd finished her ice cream and was sitting on the bed, looking around at her old toys. He sat beside his daughter. He said, "The doctor says you need rest. Big day tomorrow." Chidera looked at the bed nervously. She said, "It's so big, so soft. I'm not used to beds anymore." Richard's heart broke again. He said, "Would it help if I stayed with you?" "Until you fall asleep." Chidera nodded quickly. She said, "Please, don't leave." Richard settled onto the bed beside her, and Chidera immediately curled against his side. He stroked her hair gently. She said, "Daddy." Her voice was drowsy. He said, "Yes, baby?" She said, "What if Mama comes back? What if she's angry?" Richard chose his words carefully. He said, "Your Mama is sick, sweetheart. She needs help. But no matter what happens with her, you're not going back to the streets. You're staying here where you're safe. That's a promise." Chidera was quiet. Then she said, "I miss her sometimes. Even though she left, is that okay?" Richard's voice was gentle. He said, "Of course it's okay. She's your mama. It's okay to miss her and be angry at her at the same time." As Chidera's breathing slowed into sleep, Richard stayed exactly where he was. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something like peace. The next morning, Richard woke to soft crying. Chidera was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. He sat up immediately. He said, "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head. She said, "I woke up and I didn't remember where I was. I thought I was back under the bridge. Then I saw you and I remembered. This is real." Richard pulled her close. He said, "It's real. You're home. You're safe." Mrs. Adebayo knocked softly and entered with a breakfast tray. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. Chidera's eyes widened. She said, "All of this is for me?" Mrs. Adebayo smiled. She said, "All for you, Chi-Chi. Eat as much as you want." At 9:30, the Mercedes pulled up outside the Lagos State Family Court in Ikeja. Richard held Chidera's hand as they walked inside. Barrister Okonkwo met them in the lobby. He crouched down to Chidera's level. He said, "Hello, Chidera. I'm going to help make sure you get to stay with your daddy. Is that what you want?" Chidera nodded. She said, "I want to stay with him. I don't want to go back to the streets." They were ushered into a small courtroom. The judge, Justice Adeyemi, was a stern-looking woman in her 60s. She addressed Chidera directly. She said, "Young lady, can you tell me your name?" Chidera's voice was barely audible. She said, "Chidera Adeleke, ma." The judge asked several questions. Where had Chidera been living? Under Costain Bridge with other children. Where was her mother? She didn't know. Her mother had left her at a bus stop and never came back. When was the last time she ate before yesterday? Maybe 2 days. Sometimes longer. Justice Adeyemi looked at Richard. She said, "Mr. Adeleke, you say you've been searching for your daughter for 3 years." Richard stood, still holding Chidera. He said, "Yes, Your Honor. My ex-wife took her during our divorce. I've been fighting for custody since then. I hired investigators, filed multiple court motions, spent millions trying to find her. I never stopped looking." The judge studied him. She said, "The doctor's report indicates severe neglect. Your daughter is malnourished, underweight, and shows signs of trauma." Richard nodded. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, I'm already working with doctors to address her medical needs. Whatever she needs to heal, she'll have." Justice Adeyemi looked at Chidera again. She said, "Young lady, do you want to stay with your father, or would you prefer to wait for your mother?" Chidera's response was immediate. She said, "I want to stay with Daddy. Mama's sick. She can't take care of me." "But Daddy can. I want to stay with him." The judge nodded. She said, "Very well, I'm granting temporary emergency custody to Mr. Adeleke effective immediately." But Justice Adeyemi wasn't finished. She said, "However, this is temporary. I'm ordering a full investigation into the mother's whereabouts and condition. I'm ordering psychological evaluations for the child. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a full custody hearing." She looked at Richard. She said, "Mr. Adeleke, I've seen many custody cases in my career. Very few fathers fight as hard as you did. You didn't give up. That speaks well of your character. Don't disappoint this child. She's been through enough." Richard's voice was thick with emotion. He said, "I won't, Your Honor. I promise." As they left the courtroom, Richard felt like he could breathe fully for the first time in 3 years. Chidera was legally his now. Temporarily, yes, but still his. No one could take her away. She was safe. Over the next weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Richard cleared his schedule completely. He worked from home, conducting meetings via video call. He didn't want Chidera out of his sight. Dr. Ogunle visited twice a week to monitor Chidera's physical recovery. She was gaining weight slowly. The hollow look faded from her face. The infected cuts healed. Color returned to her skin. But the psychological healing was slower. Chidera had nightmares. She'd wake up screaming, convinced she was back on the streets. Richard would rush to her room and hold her until the panic passed. She hoarded food. Richard would find crackers hidden under her pillow, bread stuffed in her dresser drawers. The child psychologist, Dr. Okafor, was a gentle woman who specialized in trauma. After the 3rd session, she called Richard in. She said, "Mr. Adeleke, your daughter has been through significant trauma. But children are remarkably resilient. With time, patience, and consistent love, she will heal," Richard said. "What can I do?" "How do I help her?" Dr. Okafor said. "Be present. Be consistent. Don't make promises you can't keep. When she tests you, and she will, stay calm. She's learning whether you're safe, whether you'll abandon her like her mother did. Prove to her that you won't." Richard took the advice seriously. When Chidera threw tantrums, he stayed calm. When she pushed him away, tested boundaries, he remained steady. When she asked for the 100th time if he was really going to keep her, he answered. He said, "Yes. Always. You're my daughter. I'm your father. That doesn't change." Slowly, gradually, Chidera began to believe him. One morning, about 6 weeks after Richard found her, Chidera came into his home office. He was on a video call with investors, but he immediately muted his microphone. She held out a piece of paper. She said, "I drew this for you. It was a picture of the two of them holding hands, standing in front of a house. Above them, a bright sun and the words, "I love you, Daddy," in careful letters. Richard's eyes filled with tears. He said, "This is beautiful, baby. Can I hang it up right here so I can see it while I work?" Chidera nodded, pleased. She said, "Are you working a lot?" Richard thought about how to answer. He said, "I am. But not like before. Now I only work when you're busy or sleeping. You're more important than work. That's a promise I'm keeping." Chidera seemed to accept this. She said, "Okay, when you're done working, can we go to the park?" Richard glanced at his screen, at the investors waiting. Then he looked at his daughter. He said, "Actually, I'm done now. Let's go to the park right now." Chidera's face lit up. She said, "Really?" He closed his laptop. He said, "Really? Work can wait. You can't." They spent the afternoon at a nearby park. Chidera played on the swings, laughing as Richard pushed her higher. She fed ducks at the pond. She ran through the grass with energy he hadn't seen in years. Then, 3 months after Richard found Chidera, James called with news. He said, "Sir, we found Patricia. She's in a psychiatric hospital in Ibadan. She's been there for the past 2 months." Richard's stomach dropped. He said, "A psychiatric hospital," James confirmed. He said, "Severe depression with psychotic features." She checked herself in shortly after abandoning Chidera. Richard sat with that information for a long time. Then he said, "Set up a meeting." Supervised, at the hospital. "Let's see where she is mentally." He talked to Dr. Okafor first. She said, "This could be very difficult for Chidera. We need to prepare her carefully." They spent 2 therapy sessions preparing Chidera for the possibility of seeing Patricia. Chidera's reactions were complicated: fear, hope, anger, love, all tangled together. Finally, she said, "I want to see her, but I want Daddy there too." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday. Richard, Chidera, and Dr. Okafor drove to the psychiatric hospital in Ibadan. Patricia was waiting in a small visiting room. When Richard saw her, he barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, her hair was cut short, she wore no makeup. She looked older, fragile, broken, but when she saw Chidera, her face transformed. She said, "Baby." "Oh, my baby." Chidera pressed against Richard's side, uncertain. Richard said, "It's okay. You don't have to hug her if you don't want to. But you can if you do." Chidera took a hesitant step forward. Patricia dropped to her knees, tears streaming. She said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, baby. I was sick. I was so sick and I made terrible choices. I left you alone. I failed you. I'm sorry." Chidera stood frozen. Then she said, "Why did you leave me? Why didn't you come back?" Patricia's face crumpled. She said, I thought you'd be better off without me. I was hearing things, seeing things that weren't real. I thought terrible people were after us. I thought if I left you somewhere safe, they couldn't hurt you. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Everything I thought was wrong. I'm sick, baby. I'm getting help now. But I can't take back what I did." Chidera's voice was small. She said, "I was scared. I was hungry. I didn't know what to do." Patricia sobbed openly. She said, I know. If I could change it, I would. All I can do is say I'm sorry and hope that someday you can forgive me." Chidera looked back at Richard. He gave her an encouraging nod. She turned back to Patricia and said, "Dr. Okafor says people can be sick and not know it. That sometimes sickness makes people do bad things. She said it's not always their fault." Patricia wiped her eyes. She said, "Your Dr. Okafor is right. I wasn't myself. I haven't been myself for a long time. But that doesn't excuse what I did to you." Chidera took another step closer. She said, "I missed you. Even when I was angry, I missed you. Patricia's voice broke. She said, "I missed you too, baby, every second." They didn't hug. Not yet. But Chidera reached out and touched Patricia's hand briefly. It was a start. The visit lasted 30 minutes. As they left, Patricia said, "Mr. Adeleke, can I speak with you? Alone?" Richard looked at Dr. Okafor. She nodded and took Chidera to wait in the hall. Patricia said, "Thank you for finding her, for keeping her safe, for not turning her against me completely." Richard's voice was carefully neutral. He said, "I didn't do it for you, but Chidera deserves to know her mother. When you're healthy enough." Patricia nodded. She said, "I don't expect forgiveness. From you or from her. I just want you to know I didn't do this maliciously. I was sick, I am sick, but I'm getting better. And when I'm well enough, I'd like to be part of her life again. If you'll allow it." "If she wants it," Richard said. "The court will decide what's appropriate. But Patricia, if you ever put her in danger again, I will make sure you never see her again. Do you understand?" Patricia met his eyes. She said, "I understand. Take care of our daughter, Richard. She's lucky to have you. Did this story touch your heart the way it touched mine? Smash that subscribe button for more amazing stories that will restore your faith in family love. Like if you believe Chidera deserved her happy ending. Comment below and tell us what you learned from this story. I read every single comment and love hearing your thoughts. Ring that notification bell so you never miss these incredible tales of love, hope, and redemption. Until next time, keep believing in the power of never giving up on the people you love. The 30-day review hearing came and went. Justice Adeyemi reviewed the progress reports. Chidera's medical improvements, her therapy sessions, her school enrollment, her stable home environment, Patricia's psychiatric hospitalization and ongoing treatment. The judge ruled that full custody would remain with Richard indefinitely. Patricia would be allowed supervised visitation once her doctors cleared her, but she would not have unsupervised contact until a future review. Life moved forward. Chidera continued to heal. She laughed more easily now. She invited friends over. She joined the school choir. She excelled in art class. She talked about wanting a dog, and Richard immediately started researching breeds. She was becoming a child again, not just a survivor, but a child. And Richard was becoming the father he should have been all along. One evening, about a year after Richard had found Chidera in traffic, they were sitting on the balcony watching the Lagos sunset. Chidera was drawing while Richard reviewed a contract on his tablet. She looked up and said, "Daddy, do you ever think about that day, when you saw me begging?" Richard set down his tablet. He said, "Every day, baby, every single day," she said. "What do you think about?" He considered his answer carefully. He said, "I think about how close I came to losing you forever. How if the traffic had been different, if I'd taken a different route, if Moses hadn't noticed you, I might have driven right past. And I think about how grateful I am that didn't happen." Chidera nodded. She said, "I think about it too. Sometimes I remember how scared I was when I saw your car. I almost ran away." She paused. She said, "I'm glad I didn't." Richard smiled. He said, "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." She went back to her drawing. Then she said, "Daddy," he said. "Yes?" she said. "I love you." Richard's eyes filled with tears. He said, "I love you too, baby, so much. More than anything in the world." Chidera smiled and returned to her drawing. Richard watched her, this small miracle, this child who'd survived the impossible, this daughter who'd forgiven him for not finding her sooner, who'd chosen to believe in him again. He'd been given a second chance. Not everyone got that. He was determined not to waste it. The business could succeed or fail. Money could come or go. Awards meant nothing compared to this. To Chidera drawing on the balcony at sunset, To her laughter when he made silly faces, to her trust when she reached for his hand, to her voice saying, "I love you." This was success. This was what mattered. Everything else was just noise. As the sun set over Lagos, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Richard pulled out his phone and took a picture of Chidera drawing. Not to post on social media, not to show investors, just to have, to remember this moment, this perfect, ordinary moment that would have been impossible a year ago. He looked at the photo on his screen. His daughter, home, safe, loved, healing. It had been the worst day of his life when Patricia took her, the most terrifying when he saw her begging in traffic, the longest night when he'd searched the bridges and streets of Lagos. But this moment, right now, made all of it worthwhile. Because she was here. They were together. And they had time. Time to build new memories, time to heal old wounds, time to become the family they should have been all along. Richard set down his phone and pulled Chidera close. She leaned against him, still drawing. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, safe, full of love. And that was everything.